Well, fair use. What is it? Does it apply? And how do I use it? Right here on Legit Podcast Pro when we are back. Welcome to Legit Podcast Pro, the podcast. I am Gordon Firemark, also known to you as the Podcast Lawyer. No matter whether you are a serious professional or you're podcasting as a hobby or something somewhere in between, this show is for you because you take your podcasting seriously. You don't have to actually be a pro to be professional. It's about your commitment to approaching things like a pro. After all, you take your sound quality seriously. You take your content seriously. And you should take the business side and the back end, the law, the regulations, and those kinds of things seriously as well. And to help you with that, I am here to answer your questions, to share legal and business topics around the podcast arena, and interviewing other legit podcast pros. We record live every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific. You can find us doing that live on video on Facebook, both in the Legit Podcast Pro free Facebook group. Please come and join us. Or also on the Podcast Lawyer page, which is facebook.com/podcastlaw. So if you've got a question, drop it in the comments and we'll respond in a future episode. But today, we're going to answer some questions about fair use. The question came in one of the forums that I'm a member of. It's this person said, I am looking at starting a blog and a podcast that examines a specific band's music. I am looking to create a community as well as to examine social implications of this music. I'd like to go through their work song by song, eventually to make money from this venture through affiliate marketing and sponsors. Does commentary and broader general discussion constitute fair use? Is the amount of each song that I play in my podcast a factor? Can I relate all of the lyrical content without repercussion? Again, it would mean a lot to me, excuse me, if you choose to answer this. Hopefully, this can be the start of a long podcasting journey. Thank you so much. So before I jump into the answer to that, I will just say, because I'm going to be dispensing some important legal information, I am a lawyer, but that does not mean that I am your lawyer unless you have hired me to give you advice. This is intended as general information only, and it does not establish an attorney-client relationship. It is not a substitute for a private independent consultation with an attorney that you've selected and hired to give you the advice after a full investigation of the facts and the law that are relevant to your particular situation. So we're going to get into this fair use discussion here in just a moment, but first I have one more announcement to make. We're going to be doing a Get Legit GoPro webinar on February 24th, 2022, and you can find out more information about that by visiting register.legitpodcastpro.com. Get in there and learn in detail the specific things that you must do in order to get legit and go pro, turn your podcasting into a legit operation so you don't encounter any of the kinds of problems that we talk about here on the show. All right, so back to the question. Fair use. So first of all, let me break down the question. Number one, is commentary and broader general discussion fair use? The answer to that one is sometimes, and I'll explain why in a moment. Is the amount of each song that I play in my podcast a factor? Yes, absolutely. The amount and substantiality of what you've used is one of the four key factors in the fair use analysis. And again, I'll cover that in a little more depth in a second. Relating all of the lyrical content. No, the lyrical content is part of the musical composition, and it itself is a work protected by copyright. So you can't just reprint the lyrics or recite them even without performing them musically, because that is the same, or that's a public performance of those lyrics. So you can't do that if it's not fair use, and if so, that would amount to an infringement. So here's the basic rule. The basic rule is this. Copyright attaches to every work of authorship, presuming it's original and it's fixed in some tangible form, recorded, written, whatever. It has a copyright from the moment of its creation, and that copyright lasts for the life of the author plus 70 years. Older copyrights, it was 95 years from the date of publication is what we need to remember. Now, any unauthorized use of that copyrighted material without permission from the owner is copyright infringement unless it satisfies a particular defense. I'm not going to call it an exception. It's a defense. The one we're talking about here is called fair use. Fair use is a product of judicial work during the mid-20th century, where judges were confronted with this conflict between the First Amendment, guarantees of freedom of speech and of the press, and a law that says, a copyright law that says you can't make copies of these things. You can't make derivative works. You can't publish and perform things in public because that infringes the copyright. So you can see that that is an inherent conflict. And so judges needed to craft an approach to dealing with making the First Amendment defense viable. So they came up with, over the course of the middle of the 20th century, this four-factor test. And that four-factor test was later adopted by Congress and made a part of the actual copyright code when the law was revised in 1976, the 1976 Copyright Act. So now fair use resides at Section 107 of Title 17 of the United States Code, the Copyright Act. So the four factors that the judges came up with are, first, the purpose and character of the allegedly infringing use, specifically whether or not it is of a critical commentary, educational kind of a nature, or whether it's a more commercial, less socially acceptable, I guess you could say, kind of a use. The second factor is the nature of the original. And the third factor is the amount and the substantiality of the portion taken. So you don't have to necessarily take the whole thing in order to be using a substantial chunk of it, and vice versa. You might not be taking a very substantial chunk, but if you're using a long passage, that is quantitatively substantial as well. So the amount and substantiality of the portion taken, and then the market impact. That is the potential impact that the alleged infringement can have on the market for or value of the original work. So it's not about whether you make money from it. It's about whether the owner might lose money or might suffer a loss in value as a consequence of the infringement. And then the final sort of question that we sort of roll around, I guess it relates mainly to that nature of the original, is the new work transformative? Does it somehow change the meaning, the purpose, the interpretation, the discussion of the original? And if it is transformative, that's going to weigh in favor of fair use. So purpose and character, educational use, critical commentary use, that's going to lean in favor of fair use. The commercial use, not so much. The amount you take, the market impact, the nature of the original, all of those are your four factors. So, for example, we have all seen those videos on YouTube, and we probably heard podcasts that do it too, where there's a talking over the music or talking over the television show or something like that, where the host of the show is commenting on and reacting to what's happening in the audio or on the screen. Those reaction videos, because they are transforming. Now, it's not about the content of the underlying material as much as it is about the reaction. And so that's often viewed as fair use, and we haven't seen a lot of lawsuits relating to that in particular. Commentary, it's one thing. If you're going to do a music show, what's important is that it can't be a replacement for listening to the actual music. It shouldn't be an alternate listening experience. This is not a way to create a music listening show. If you want to do that, you got to get the licenses and do it by the book. So that's sort of fair use in a very quick nutshell. Now, I will say that there is risk to this. Yes, there is a defense called fair use. That's the thing, though. It is a defense. It is not a free pass. In order to be engaged in this analysis of this four-factor test, you are still engaged in fighting a lawsuit. You are the defendant. You've been named and sued by a copyright owner in an infringement case. The other thing that needs to be very clear is this only applies in the United States because the First Amendment only applies to the United States. Now, other countries have similar principles. In many places, it's referred to as fair dealing, but not all countries do. And in fact, many countries that are big makers of intellectual property don't have any equivalent of fair use. If it's infringing, it's infringing, and you're liable. And finally, here in the U.S., even, you may still get taken down if you use stuff without permission. After all, the algorithms on the YouTube and Facebook and the mechanisms for takedowns still exist and are still available. And yes, they can be abused, and there's remedies for that as well, but it's a big hassle. So my recommendation is don't rely on fair use. It is expensive and it is risky, and most of the time it's just not worth the fight. So if you want to create that music criticism and commentary show, I would make sure that what you're doing is in fact a transformative use and not merely a music listening experience. So that is the rundown of fair use. Now, what I want to tell you is I'm looking for a particular, there we go, that this episode, like all episodes of Legit Podcast Pro, is brought to you by the free Legit Podcast Pro community, where you will find more depth on these and other kinds of issues. And you can learn more about getting legit as a podcast pro, where I do live Q&A sessions and bonus training and all those kinds of things inside the group. It's absolutely free, so please visit legitpodcastpro.com and join us next time on Legit Podcast Pro. Thanks for being with me, and we'll see you again really soon. This has been Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this is...